Hi, Rafael, ¿qué tal? ¿Cómo estás? Bien, amigas y amigos.
Dear friends, welcome to the Rafael del Pino Foundation, to this new dialogue in our program and meetings, which is part of our permanent commitment with the rigorous analysis of the major economic, technological, and strategic challenges of our time. We are living in a time when the boundaries between industrial innovation, national security, and strategic independence are becoming more blurry. Technological acceleration, the reorganization of supply chains, the emergence of dual-use technologies, and global competition for scientific leadership are shaping an environment that demands new responses, new models, and above all, new leaders capable of anticipating and building the future. Europe, and Spain with it, faces the urgent challenge of strengthening its industrial, technological, and defense capabilities. It is not just a matter of responding to a more uncertain geopolitical context. It is a matter of guaranteeing our freedom, our decision-making capacity, and our potential for prosperity in a world undergoing profound transformation. This is a conversation we want to have today, lucid, demanding, and long-term oriented. To guide us in this conversation, we have two exceptional guests. You have their CVs on the Foundation's webpage. I don't want to steal time for this very interesting dialogue. And you will find there all the many initiatives that our guests are involved in and all the recognitions they have. But let me just very briefly give you a few details on his CVs. Rear Admiral Lorin Selvy is a 26th Chief of Naval Research at the U.S. Navy's Office of Naval Research. Was so until 2023, and has led one of the world's most influential institutions in the development of cutting-edge and dual-use technologies. The ONR, as this office is known, has been a global benchmark in the creation of innovation ecosystems capable of transforming advanced science into operational capabilities and industrial solutions. Few people have such in-depth knowledge of how innovation is articulated when speed, reliability, and technological superiority are strategic factors. It is a pleasure and a privilege having you with us. And of course, it is also a pleasure to have with us Professor Luis Perez-Breva from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. He's one of the most original thinkers in the field of applied innovation, if I may say so, Luis. He is founder and director of a very relevant program, the Innovations Teams program that we will try to bring to Spain with his help. And he is also one of our scholars, and he is also a professor at the Rafael del Pino Institute. And he has developed a very special methodology that has generated more than 200 projects and given rise to more than 40 high-tech companies. He will talk about this briefly in his introduction before the dialogue begins. His work has inspired globally renowned initiatives such as flagship pioneering. And of course, without the rationale of innovation, and it is an extraordinary example of how to convert scientific knowledge into a sustained industrial impact. His experience is particularly relevant for Spain at a time when strengthening our deep innovation fabric is a strategic priority. The convergence of their trajectories, of both speakers' trajectories, offers us a unique opportunity to reflect on the future, on how to promote a more robust industry, how to accelerate technology transfer, and how to integrate innovation in defense, and how to ensure a true strategic autonomy in Spain and in Europe, as we mentioned in the title of this dialogue. And I will end. The Rafael del Pino Foundation was created to support leadership, knowledge, and freedom. This dialogue embodies those three pillars. I therefore invite you to listen carefully to our guests, to think ambitiously, and to plan boldly. So we welcome and let us give a big hand to Rear Admiral Lorin Selvy and Professor Luis Perez-Breva, who will say a few introductory words before the dialogue between them begins. Thank you very much.
English. ¿Sigo en inglés?
Sí,
Sí.
English.
So now we're going to do the rest of this conversation in English.
Sorry.
So thank you very much. Thank you to the foundation for everything, and thank you for allowing us to switch to English. Well, thank you for everything. The truth is that ever since in early 2000, at the beginning of the century, the foundation gave me the chance to actually explore this topic, the very topic we're going to be talking about today. I've been thanking the foundation time and again and coming back to Spain to share everything I've been learning about how to take technology into the world. And right now we're in the middle of actually doing a number of projects together. I'm not going to bore you with a description of my CV again because you've already heard it. As I said, as Vicente said, it's online. But what I want to tell you is about what we're doing next. So one of the things that's happening this week, is we've started to bring some of the knowledge of my courses at MIT about how to transfer technology into the world. Here, we had a first pilot course at the very beginning of the week here in this foundation, in this very same room, right, with the idea that in the future we might be able to bring to Spain all of the things I've learned about how to move technology to the world. Now, so that we're very clear, this is the knowledge at the very frontier of how to take advantage of the latest technologies. So there's a chance, through the leadership of the foundation and their support, to bring to Spain essentially forward 40 years, 50 years, 60 years into the future in a very short period of time. At least that's the ambition. And the way we're doing it is pretty much the way I would do it in any of my classes, which is we're going to turn this into almost an MIT classroom, the way we would have done there. And for a second, I'm going to ask you all to open your minds, and I'm going to introduce you to what I would do to my students, which is bring a person that routinely deals with technology and bringing this technology into the world from an angle that's incredibly different from what they think technology innovation is about. Mm-hmm. And then we're going to have a conversation for a few minutes about this, extract as much expertise as we can from Admiral Selvy about his particular point of view of how technology makes it into the world. Hopefully the two of us will have a dialogue that will give you enough to think about so you guys can ask a lot of questions. We get better with the questions, so our job is to give you lots of opportunities to ask questions from us. So as I said, for now, for the next few minutes, you are all kind of MIT students, and this is the way it would happen exactly in any of my classes.
And there will be an exam at the end.
Exactly, right. So let me just start with asking Lorin if you can share with everyone a bit about your background, like
Sure.
what's the trajectory of the
First of all, I'd like to thank the Rafael del Pino Foundation. And Vicente, thank you so much. You've been a great host and taking care of us all week, so thank you so much. It is a true honor to be here. And it's my first time in Madrid, beautiful city, and just fantastic. I need to come back for a longer stay, obviously. But so my story, so this is really funny, but literally 30 minutes ago, I got a call from a man who, when I was in high school, was the person who introduced me to the submarine force. This is just crazy serendipity, but literally he called me he's 85 years old now. He wanted to talk to me and congratulate me on my career. And it just happened, which is amazing. So it's a little heartwarming story. But I was a kid who grew up in the 60s, so I'm almost 62. So I was a space kid. I watched every space launch that I could watch as a kid growing up. And I saw Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin step on the moon. And I think I was five and a half or something when that happened. And that's, I remember a few things before that in my life, but that's the most impactful thing I remember as a child. And I remember distinctly thinking, I want to be an astronaut and explore the solar system. That was my dream, right? Fast forward to high school, I'm sitting in the back row, and over the course of the semester, I'm working my way to the front row, and the teacher says to me, "Can you see the board?" I'm like, "Yeah, I can't see the board very well." So I had to go get glasses. And unfortunately, at that time in our history, there was no corrective vision surgery. And if you didn't have perfect vision, you could not be a fighter pilot. And if you weren't a fighter pilot, you couldn't be an astronaut. That's different today. They have mission specialists and other things, but that was not the case back then. So I knew at that moment in time, my dream was crushed. And I was like, what am I going to do with my life? And, I think I was 15 or something. So, I had a lot of time to figure it out. But fortuitously, sometime within a year of that, I was somehow I went to a friend's house in Hamilton, Virginia, which is outside of Washington, D.C. and sitting around the table with my friend's father, and I don't know how we got on the subject, but he starts describing the fact that he had been a submariner in the U.S. Navy. And he describes what it was like to be on his submarine, which was USS Stonewall Jackson. And he described these stories of the adventures and the technology and the skilled people, the sailors. And I don't know what happened, but a switch went in my brain, and I just, at that moment in time, knew that was what I was supposed to do, right? And so I went on from that, and I was a straight A student. I was the valedictorian, the number one graduate of my high school class. I was the president of my high school class. I was an overachiever because I knew to get into the Navy and to do this, I had to be the best of the best. And so that drove me to do all that. I went to the University of Virginia, studied nuclear engineering because I knew I wanted to be on a submarine. I was in the Navy's training program at that point, and I was commissioned as an ensign, which is with the low rank of officers, into the Navy, and went into the submarine force, and I never looked back. And so I served 37 years, 36 and 3/4 years in the U.S. Navy, and I tell everybody I got to live my dream. I literally got to live my dream. It wasn't the initial dream, but it was the dream I had in high school when I met Mr. Fletcher, who gave me this kind of inspiration to be a submariner. And so the fact that he calls me tonight when I knew I was coming here to say this was just like, wow, this is like meant to be. Anyway, I became a submariner. I served all the way up through command. I was a captain of a fast attack nuclear submarine out of Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, which was also my dream. My dream was very specific. I wanted to be Hawaii, and I wanted to be going into the Western Pacific for missions, which I did all of that. I left command in 2007. Came back to Washington, D.C. area. I was in the Pentagon for a number of years, doing all the stuff you do to define, we call it requirements, define what things the Navy needs to buy for the future of the Navy. So I did that, and then I became a program manager where I ran all of the acquisition programs for purchasing, everything from an entire submarine to a torpedo to a radar system and everything in between. I did that, made admiral, commanded all of the Navy's research and development centers. We call them warfare centers, but they're research and development centers. Had roughly 30,000 people working for me, taking care of every aspect of a ship or submarine. If you think of something as complex as a nuclear submarine, there are thousands of systems, thousands of components. Every single system on a submarine, hydraulics, high pressure air, ventilation, sanitation, plumbing, every single system has a person in the U.S. Navy who is the subject matter expert for that system. He or she knows everything about that system and all the components in it. Those people work for me in the warfare centers. And it was kind of then when I started seeing that there was a lot of technologies outside of the Navy that were having trouble getting into the Navy. And as a result, the Navy we had amazing equipment, and we still do, we had a hard time adapting and bringing that technology in to advance ourselves. And that is, to be truthful, that's still the case today in a lot of places in the United States. Everybody thinks, the United States got this amazing technology, but we've got a lot of systems that are very resistant to change. And that's a lot we're going to talk about tonight. Anyway, I went on from this warfare center job, this research and development job, to being the Navy's chief engineer. And in that job, I was responsible for designing all of the future ships and submarines, and all of the weapon systems that went on it. I literally signed we call it a specification, but it's the blueprint for the Columbia-class submarine, which is our brand new ballistic missile submarine that's being built right now in Groton, Connecticut. It's a little over 50% built. That submarine will replace our Ohio-class submarine, which is the submarine we have today that carries all of our strategic ballistic missiles, which is our deterrent against Russia, China, or whoever would like to attack us. And that's been the mainstay of our deterrence since the early 1960s when we put those initial ships to sea. I did that job 4 years, and then I finally went on to my last job, where I was the chief of naval research, which we talked about, where I ran the Office of Naval Research, where I really got in touch with the technologies that are really at the cutting edge of what's happening around the world today. I basically deployed about $10 billion in 3 years that I was in that job. Broadly speaking, it was in kind of three buckets: artificial intelligence, advanced sensors, and robotics. And if you think about the world we live in right now, where you're seeing this convergence of those three areas, that's transforming the world. Everything from your car I have a Tesla and it drives me all over the place. I have to have my hand on the wheel, but it's doing the driving. Trust me. I mean, I watch it, and it gets better and better every day. That convergence is happening across all sectors of industry and across all sectors of the military. If you're following the news of what's happened in Ukraine for the past several years, and I know you are, because I think everybody is, especially those in Europe, advanced autonomous systems is transforming the battlefield. And that's something that you want me to stop or we go further? Yeah, that's something that when I was the chief of naval research, I basically looked around and I said, okay, I love all these amazing complex warships, submarines, aircraft carriers. I think they're phenomenal. But the reality is they cost billions of dollars. An aircraft carrier, $13 billion. A ballistic missile submarine, $5 billion. We cannot afford, even the United States, we cannot afford to buy as many of them as really all of our studies say we need. We can't buy that many. We cannot do it. So I started saying we need to have something to hedge for this lack of capacity, because if we can't buy the numbers we need, what else are we going to do that's going to be kind of, I call it the backup plan, the hedge strategy. So I actually developed this thing called the hedge strategy. I started talking public about this idea, and I kind of jokingly came up with this thing. I called it the small, the agile, and the many. Smaller systems and sensors that, as a result of being smaller, are cheaper, less complex. You can buy thousands of them, buy single digit or tens of them. Many, obviously that's obvious. Agile, small, agile, many. Agile is not necessarily physical agility, although that's nice. It's really about adaptability. How rapidly can you change the design? How rapidly can you make it look like something different, sound like something different, have a different radio frequency pattern, so the adversary is always kept wondering what's coming next. And that is how you keep an adversary off balance, whether it's in business or in warfare, right? And that's so I put that forward in the fall of 2021. And in the spring of, the late winter of 22, Russia rolled in Ukraine. And warfare, what I was talking about, became a reality. And Ukraine, a nation with a very minimal navy, mostly tugboats and some small patrol boats, defeated the entire Russian Black Sea fleet with autonomous drones, robot boats and drones. It's what I was saying was possible. It totally validated it. Because to be frank, when I put my vision out, a lot of people are like, oh, come on, Selvy, how's that going to happen? These are big ships. You can't sink a ship with a drone. Well, it turns out you can. And so that became a reality. And so in the course of all this, I still struggle with how to move technology faster, because as I saw this world that was going with this autonomous systems and sensors, I recognized we have got to go faster. That's when I made my decision to actually get out of the Navy, because I said, look, I could try to stay and fight it from the inside, or I can get out and actually be able to speak more freely, more publicly like this, and work with companies like Louise's and several others that I'm working with to actually try to find ways to move that faster. And I think that's what we should spend the rest of the time talking about today.
Definitely. So there's a lot of really good stuff in there. So and one of the things that's actually is very relevant to the moment we're in Europe now, to the moment Europe is living right now, because in Europe is awakening to the need to actually introduce defense, and to do it in a manner that's consistent with the principles of the European Union, as well as with the way we've been doing research, which is certainly not military. It's a number of things to do. And so, but the United States has actually been using its military for well over 60 years to advance faster than anyone in terms of research and technology. So I think it would be good if you could explain to us a bit what, and then this is part of the exam later, by the way, what is the Office of Naval Research? What does it do? Right.
So coming out of World War II, there was recognition that the science and technology that was done by Vannevar Bush, who was an MIT professor who went to President Roosevelt in the early days of the war and said, hey, you, Mr. President, the United States needs a science and technology organization to start looking at advanced technologies that can actually change warfare to the advantage of the United States and our allies. So we established an organization, and coming out of that are things like radar, advanced communications, sonar, proximity fuses. These were all things that came out because this group of scientists that were a part of this organization worked closely with the military to understand their needs and their challenges, and work with the academics and research universities as well as research organizations around the country and the world, and found these technologies and then rapidly moved them into the military for use. And that, as well as our industrial capacity, is what allowed us to win World War II. So coming out of the war, there were a lot of people that wanted to just put all this stuff to rest, say we don't need that anymore. But Vannevar Bush went to the president, at this point it was President Truman because Roosevelt had died, and said the United States needs to continue this tradition of the government funding science and technology, because only the government has a very long view and is willing to spend the resources without an immediate return on investment that's within maybe, it could be decades away, right? And so he convinced the president that that was a good idea. They were trying to stand up what is now our National Science Foundation. There was a lot of political infighting that got in the way of approving that legislation. So the Navy came in and said, well, we've got an organization that we think would be good for this. It's the Office of Naval Research. So in 1946, the Congress passed a law that established the Office of Naval Research. President Truman signed that into law, and that became the first government science and technology organizations following World War II that is still here today. And we invest in everything from basic research, which is nothing more than a college laboratory's phenomenology that some scientists thinks is relevant, all the way through developing advanced prototypes so we can actually take into the field and prove to a Marine or a sailor that this is something that would actually help him or her win the war if we had a war, right? That was incredibly unique at the time. And even to this day, it's still unique, and we can talk more about that in a minute. But ONR has been around since 1946, basically having this incredible linkage between the government, academia, and industry. And that triumvirate, three stools of the stool, as it were, are very critically important to how the United States has maintained this incredible relevance in science and technology and advanced tech to this very day.
Let me build on that. So since you mentioned academia, so when I have my students in the room, so most of the default, we live in an era in which the default investment is, well, I have an idea, let's go to a venture capitalist, right? And so what I ask my students is, look for someone else, right? Because there's typically someone in the world that has a strategic need or a desire to change the world in a given manner,
right,
that's willing to put the money for the strategic need, not just for the money itself, right? And that person is typically a better partner. So I'm actually asking my students to look for partners, not for money, right? And then along the process, make that sense. So can you tell us a bit like how ONR is actually a partner like that? And
So when I was Chief Naval Research, it was roughly $600 million every year that I was allowed to put into colleges and universities, mostly in the U.S., but some overseas, but mostly the U.S., to do basic research. Again, it's basic research. It may not have a known military application yet, but I had a staff of roughly 400 PhDs that had deep expertise in very electrical engineering, advanced manufacturing, photonics, autonomy, AI, deep expertise. And they had the authority on their own, without me, to deploy money to universities to do research in an area that they felt had some potential hope. Again, because these were lifelong experts in their fields, right? PhDs that also were in the research fields for decades. So they had deep expertise. I mean, I'm smart guy. I went to MIT, but I'm not as deep as these people were. So I did not tell them what to do with this money, right? I would occasionally ask, what are we doing with this money? But I allowed them the autonomy to invest in this research. And when they did, over time, they would monitor what was happening with the money and with the research. When they started seeing a relevant application, they would go to the next level of funding, which is now applied technologies. Now there's an application. So now they do even more research with a focus on an actual mission or application for the military. If that continued to pan out, be something they thought was good, they would go to the next level, which is advanced technology demonstration, which is where you start building prototypes, right? Building things that can show somebody, a warfighter, what it can do for them. That's kind of unique because most organizations, even today in the United States, they divide the funding line. So there's organizations that do the basic and even the applied research in one organization, but then they have to hand it over to another organization to do the prototyping, right? It works okay, but in my humble opinion, the way the Navy and ONR does it is better because that's in kind of one funding organization with one contract shop and one leader. You can fairly rapidly move the technology from that basic to applied to a technology demonstration, a prototype, right? Whereas these other organizations, you basically have to kind of pass it over the fence to another organization, convince them this is really something they should continue to be caring about. Whereas I had all that in one organization. And that's, I think, why ONR has been relatively successful is compared to some of these other organizations, even in the United States. And that model works really well. But that autonomy of those scientists being able to decide what to do with the money is critically important because, again, who was I to try to second guess someone who's got 30 years of experience in photonics, what they should do with that money, right? I was focused on were we spending too much for too long a period without getting anything out of it, but I wasn't going to second guess the fact that he or she wanted to put money in a certain organization, certain university to study something. Because again, if I did, I would have picked the wrong thing. I guarantee it. So, but it's been very successful. But then that organization, as they go to those prototypes, they would now take some of that money and send it to industry, sometimes small companies, sometimes large companies, and other government laboratories. And so that's where you start bringing in the government, academic, and business. That's where that triangle comes in. So some of that money eventually went into industry to build those prototypes. And that's very powerful too, because it gets them thinking about what could be done with this. And sometimes those companies would run with the idea and spend some of their own, we call it IRAD, which is basically their own R&D accounts, to go further that technology into something that they thought could be relevant. So you get a lot of different minds thinking, you get different pools of money that come together to go move these technologies faster. And that's very, very impactful to the warfighter at the end of the day.
So what I like about this explanation, part of the reason why I asked you to explain this is because this model of how the United States defense agencies fund research is radically different from how it is perceived from the outside. So you've described a shop that essentially funds basic research and its motion towards a useful application without even quoting once the word investing, equity, or whatnot.
Right, that's right.
Right?
That's right.
So what the observation is, and people know this, but sometimes it's hard to kind of connect the dots, is that the United States government is actually the first angel investor in effectively everything that's been done over the last several years. And the venture capital industry that has blossomed also here in Europe is only the last step.
Yeah, it's at the very
when the product is so clear that all it takes is a reasonable amount of time and so on. I think this is important because in a way what you're telling us is that in the 1940s, right, when the United States had a wake-up moment after World War II, and then wanted to start its own defense apparatus and so on, instead of going for let's invest in big companies, it went on let's invest on people, talent, research, right? And let's have the military do that.
That's right.
Isn't that kind of like, isn't that shocking?
One of the amazing outputs of this grant money, this $600 million a year that goes to these universities, is you get these PhD students and even professors that go off and start companies because they're allowed to we allow them to do that, which is actually kind of unique. Some places would not let that happen. So we encourage that. We want these people because they're the deep experts. They've been actually working with the technology, the ideas. Many of them go off and start a company. And then that's kind of where the VC will eventually come in to actually continue to provide funding to actually make some relevant use case for it for either commercial or military purposes. And that's where VC comes in. And so in fact, when I think about the money that I put in, the $10 billion I talk about, right? And again, it wasn't me, it was my people. But that money, in a couple of years, I'm already seeing the leading edge of it now. Those companies that are starting right now from that money, you're going to, over the next 5 years, there's going to be a huge proliferation of this, these autonomy, robotics, advanced sensing coming together. It's just beginning, but it's coming. And that was that's what gets us started. And again, it's because really at least in our case, only the government has the long view and the deep enough pockets to fund research that doesn't have an immediate turnaround, right? Even VCs are only going to fund something if there's a turnaround in 5 to maybe 8 years. That's kind of it. If it's kind of beyond that horizon, they're not interested. They're not going to put their money in. Their LPs will be screaming at them, "Where's my return?" So that wouldn't work. So, yeah.
So then, for me, this is very important. One more question. So,
Yeah.
just for the benefit of our audience, so ONR and the Navy effectively operates everywhere. That's correct.
Yeah.
From the bottom of the ocean.
I always say seabed to space, right? That's seabed to space. We operate all there because we have satellite payloads that are monitoring the ocean surface, trying to see through the everything. So we've got all that stuff. Yeah, seabed to space.
So you effectively run an organization. Well, actually, we're part of the engineering core of the organization, and then run the organization or the warfare centers, and then the organization, the ONR itself, that effectively does research in all domains, on all fields, like from material science to space technology to nanophysics, and I bet there is math and physics and quantum mechanics,
everything,
and all kinds of stuff there, right?
Yep.
So you're effectively like, in so many ways, as big as MIT in terms of like what you move, but except that you don't do it yourself.
Right.
You sort of let the money go wild across companies and as well as academic labs that have a pursuit, kind of pursuit, right?
Yeah.
So let me switch topics a bit. And so now,
Sure.
You must have had, and I know these anecdotes, I'm going to ask about it in a second, but you must have had the biggest challenge that we all see, which is like, hey, I just paid for this beautiful paper, right? And you got this paper, and the paper is well done. It's good research, basic research. So now what?
Right.
And I know, and I know that in your efforts to kind of address that thing, we'll talk more about that. There's this thing that I would really like you to share with the audience, which is when you went to to people in high tech, and tried to share with them the complexity of your world. So do you mind sharing that story?
Yeah. In my about a year before I left the Navy, so this is probably 2022 or so. I'm not going to say the names, but I invited some very high-profile technical people to go on a submarine with me to go see what the technology is the Navy has on a submarine. So we, I'm not going to say who they are, but so one of them had his own jet, and anyway, they flew into Hawaii. I went and picked them up, took them to the submarine piers in Pearl Harbor. We got on a little, we call it a torpedo retriever, which is a little small boat, which takes us from the pier out to the middle of the harbor. There's a submarine in the middle of the harbor waiting for us. It's turned around, ready to go back out to sea. We come up alongside. We all get off on this submarine, and we go down below decks, and we go into the wardroom, which is the like the dining room for the officers. It's like as big as a stage. It's very small. It's a table. We're all sitting around the table, and we're explaining what we're going to do for the next day on board. They stayed overnight. And we gave them a tour of the submarine, and we showed them the technology. And one of these individuals didn't sleep. He was so just absolutely amazed at this technology. He just spent this entire night. So as a result, I kind of didn't sleep either because I had to kind of take care of these folks. So we had these amazing conversations. And again, this person is steeped in AI and all kinds of other technologies. And he basically said to me, I'm just absolutely amazed. At the end of the day, your technology is amazing. It's great. But he said, it's your people. Your people are the most amazing people I've ever experienced. And he said, that's your secret weapon. It's your people. I said, this tech's amazing, but without them, have nothing. And that may seem obvious, but we're in this world today where everybody thinks, well, if you got AI, if you got these advanced computers and LLMs, you don't need people. No, the message is that's backwards. The technology needs to help support the human being, not the other way around, right? And there's people concerned about the singularity and what happens. I'm not. We'll see. I mean, I'm not. You're deeper in AI than I am. I'm not as concerned about that, but I am concerned that the message is getting convoluted and people are not really understanding what we should be doing with this technology, because the technology at the end of the day needs to serve the human being, and it needs to find ways to offload kind of some of our mental capacity that is kind of just stuck in what I call the dull and tedious tasks of your day. I mean, think about I don't know how much time these people spend on your phones, but I know that some of my kids spend too much time on their phones. And there are things that AI can do to kind of weed through a lot of the chaff, a lot of the noise in your phone, and give you back free time. That's where we should be applying technology, finding ways to advance education, help find ways to address things like drought and famine. I mean, that's where we should be using these tools to help humanity, not to replace humanity. That's like, what's that all about? So that was the big takeaway, is that as steep as these people were, even they had kind of lost a little bit of touch with what AI and other advanced tools were doing. And he's like, no, the people are the most important part of this whole equation. Anyway,
Well, I like that story because I was in this very same room maybe about 2 years ago, or a year and a half ago, giving a talk about, amongst other things, AI.
Yeah.
And I keep on giving this message to people, and nobody believes me, which is like in over 70 years of doing AI, the one constant is that every time AI has been designed to replace a human, the company has flopped.
Yeah.
It's like an almost exact rule. And instead, AIs need to be designed so the humans can do something else.
That's right.
Rather than replace the human, is give the tool to the human, right?
Yeah.
And so your story mostly says, without the human, this thing doesn't run on its own, no matter how much AI you put in there, or whether you ask something to an AI.
I relayed the story at dinner the other night, but there's a book called The Second Machine Age, written by two colleagues of Luis's at MIT. And in the book, there's a discussion and a graph that I love. And it basically says that if you think about human history, and let's just go back to the agricultural revolution, 10,000 BC roughly, right? From that time until the Industrial Revolution, the late 1700s, human population was pretty flat and very low, like hundreds of millions, very low, right? But as soon as we devised the steam engine and learned how to harness its real capacity for doing work, right? Something amazing happened, right? And if you look at, they have a graph that shows population, it just kind of like skyrockets after that, as well as this thing they call the social development index, which is kind of it's kind of a unitless term, but what it implies is that kind of prior to the Industrial Revolution, most of our lives were spent toiling in the fields, right? Because the way you survived was you grew your own food, took care of your own animals. You had large families because you needed to have a workforce to take care of all the weeding and the pruning and all the stuff you had to do to have your vegetables and your food. It took a lot of time, and you did that from sunrise to sunset every single day. And so as a result of that, you didn't have a very important resource, and I call that your thinking time, white space. You had no white space because you toiled all day. The sun goes down. You're now bumbling around with candlelight, if you had candles, to just do whatever you had to do to get ready to go to bed. Then you went to bed, and you did it all over the next day. So anyway, as a result, your capacity for doing other things, your social development index was very low, right? But as soon as the Industrial Revolution happened, they postulated that also skyrocketed. And it makes sense, because as soon as you had a machine that could do the work of 10, 50, 100 human beings, well, all of a sudden you had time. You had time. And you think about all the amazing inventions that came out in the late 1800s. I mean, everything from refrigeration, electricity, trains, locomotives, obviously you get into this century, last century, airplanes, nuclear submarine. I mean, just going to the moon, all it's just incredible. It explodes, absolutely explodes. But I contend that we're kind of at the end of that ride. And the way that I personally know it is that I don't know about you, but at the end of my week, I am like mentally overloaded. I'm full. And I mean, I've got emails I haven't caught up with. I'm going to come back from this trip tomorrow. I'm going to have freaking 150 emails I got to do something with because I haven't caught up this week. But you're at the end of your week, you are mentally drained. You're full, and your white space is like, it's minuscule if you have any at all. So I kind of think we're at the end of that ride, and I believe that if AI is adopted properly, that AI has the ability and the capacity to do kind of what the steam engine did to humans when it alleviated us from the need for doing kind of physical labor, and we started doing more mental labor. I think, again, we're at a point where we need to have a technology, in this case AI, offload some of that tedious, dull, repetitive stuff that AI can do far better than you and I can anyway, and give you back time to really critically analyze what you're doing, even what AI is doing, and give you back thinking time. Because I mean, think about what's happening in the world right now today with social media and how polarized we are. Quite frankly, I think it's because we don't have time to critically think about what's being told us. So we just kind of accept whatever comes our way, and whatever channel you pick is the loudest voice that you hear. And that results in a lot of polarization across the planet, certainly in the United States. I mean, it's everywhere. It's happening here too. And I think if you could get that get AI to take away some of that burden, you would have time to really think about stuff again, really analyze what people are telling to you, critically, ask thoughtful questions. That would take us, I think that takes us to the next level of humanity. So I think there's a lot of promise. Now, there's obviously other forks in the road where it could go wrong, and you've seen some of this over the last several decades with cybercrime and people stealing identities. That's going to happen, and unfortunately, it's not uncommon. Technology always goes faster than law, regulation, and policy. And so you're always going to have a bad actor that's going to try to find some way to contort that technology to do something evil or bad until rules, regulations, policies catch up, put in place the right curbs, limits, left and right limits to keep it in the box so it can do more good than harm. They always do some harm, but you want it to do more good than harm. Anyway.
So we're let me see, we have about 5 minutes until we need to go into the Q&A.
Yeah.
So, and I want to kind of wrap up on 2 quick topics.
Yep.
Moving back to the idea of transition of technologies that you witnessed at ONR.
Yeah.
So, quick estimate, thinking about ONR, your experience there, but also DARPA and other places that
Yeah.
do things that are, if not the same, similar or parallel to what happened at ONR.
Yeah.
Effectively investing in advanced science and research. How often, percentage-wise, would you think those technologies that you've seen make it into either the fleet or a company and actually improve humanity or society or so on?
I hope that's rhetorical and you have the answer.
I don't have the answer, but I'm hoping you'll get it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to spitball it. I mean, it's lower, it's low, right? It's low.
You don't need to guess the number.
Yeah, I don't have a number. It's low, and again, this was my frustration because again, even though with all these amazing things I've said about what ONR can do, there is still this impediment to moving that tech into kind of existing ships, submarines, aircraft carriers. We call them programs, right? Existing programs. So there's a resistance, and that's not. It's not just the Navy. This is not it's any large bureaucratic organization. Once you get set in the way you do things, whether it's building a model of a car or an airplane, it is hard to change it because there's a lot of pride in that design. It works good enough. I mean, it is hard to change it, especially when you have people that are counting nickels and pennies and trying to say, well, that's going to cost a lot. Why do we need to do that? The return on investment is already good enough. Why do you want to go change that? So it's hard. You're competing with an existing program, and that is very challenging. That is a problem, especially when you have the world's changed, right? When the United States was, 50 years ahead of everybody, it didn't matter, right? It didn't matter. We are no longer ahead of everybody. In fact, China's ahead of us in some areas, and that should concern all of us. And so we don't have that luxury of time anymore. So as a result, today, I think we need to find ways to move that technology faster. And again, this kind of comes down to what Luis is doing and some of the ideas he's got. Because again, much of this research results in a paper, right? Maybe a patent somewhere, but a paper. And a lot of that goes on the shelf. I call that the proverbial virtual technical shelf, right? So it's like a library with all these documents in it, and it's virtual. It's not a real place. But you've got thousands of those examples across at least our country, from the National Science Foundation, National Institutes of Health, ONR, my equivalents in the Army and the Air Force. Thousands of those reports of technologies that proved something worked. Some phenomenology had an application that was relevant, but it just didn't get to the program because, again, there was resistance. It wasn't the right time, wasn't the right money, whatever. So if we could find a way to repurpose that and combine some of those ideas into bigger and better ideas, I think that there's a treasure trove of opportunities out there. We just have to have a method that knows how to recombine those different technologies into new things, right? You understand this idea of it's called combinatorial innovation, and I'll just briefly riff on this if it's all right. But if you think about, here's a good example. So before 2007, most people had a digital phone. You had a phone. You had a Nokia phone or an Android. You had some kind of phone, right? Okay. You had a phone. You may have had a GPS in your car. It was probably a Garmin or a TomTom. You may have had a digital camera. You may have had even like one of those Palm Pilot things. I mean, who remembers a Palm Pilot? Anybody remember that? Yeah. It was a digital handheld device that mostly it was a calendar and like a to-do list. That was really, you could kind of write, but it was really archaic. But you had that. What else did you have? I mean, you had a bunch of these consumer electronics, but they're all separate. Oh, you had a Sony Walkman or an MP3 player for music. Or yeah, and you loved all these devices. They're all really cool and neat, but you had like 5 things in your pocket. I mean, it didn't make any sense. And guess what happened? What did Steve Jobs do? He combined them all, put them all in one thing, your phone. That was revolutionary. That's combinatorial innovation. There's many examples of that. That's just one that I happen to like. I think if we could find a way to package that, that methodology, there are hundreds of thousands of things we could go solve, right? And that's what Luis and I are trying to do with S1 Industries, his company. And I think there's huge opportunity there. I really do. So that's so to wrap up this part, so I can ask your questions. Let me kind of briefly summarize these kind of like essentially what I've heard today is, and I'm going to turn everything on its head because that's my job today. I've heard that there is a boatload of technologies, advanced science, that's sitting there waiting for someone that's willing to put things together. I've heard that when the United States had the problem of staying ahead, instead of going for more VC investment, they went for tripling down on research and technology development with military. As we think about the next challenges for Europe, what I've heard today is a recipe that you can build a really strong industry, the kind that actually gave rise to the iPhone, to everything we know today. Google, I mean, all of it,
Doing something that's kind of unexpected, which is taking military might, right, and some humility to explore the unknown, but not just like the military boundaries, but also science and technology, and do the same thing you guys do at the Navy, right? Because you just described and you've taught me this concept of commander's intent. So what you do with your scientists, you do the exact thing that you would do with your commanders. You're giving those scientists the possibility to help advance the envelope, knowing that at some point society will catch up and venture capital will have something to invest on, right? And along the process, another question, as we live in this modern world and the situation is not the exact same, but maybe it rhymes. Maybe the question is, how do we get the new efforts in defense across the globe to go in the direction of better society, more technology, more wealth, right, and better industry, as opposed to sort of fighting each other and destroying the ships that are expensive, right? Would that be a fair thing? So to me, that's what we're working together. That's what brought us together. That's how we actually we met at the Office of Naval Research when I first met Admiral Selvy there. And so what I would like to do now, if Foundation's okay, I would like first thank you all in the name of Foundation and Admiral Selvy for being here. And then I've been told, and now I'm going to do this thing hopefully well. I'm not going to look at my phone. I'm not texting anyone, right?
Just have questions.
The questions are being sent to me via WhatsApp, right? So I'm actually going to open my phone and address any questions, unless you guys want to do a question live. Go ahead.
So,
Sir.
We were talking about innovating in the Navy and in China, the armed forces, because if we don't, the Chinese will. So,
That's right.
So how do you see the threat of China and the fact that they're deploying technology? And changing balance of power?
Yeah, we talked about this earlier at lunch. So up until roughly 2000 or the early 2000s, I think China was primarily copying us and then replicating it. What I think, and I think that was it's very obvious because there's actually a video that just got released, I think yesterday by the CCP, that shows the Chinese battle force, everything from their planes, submarines, aircraft carriers, aircraft. If you look at that, when I look at that video, most of that technology looks just like ours. Everything. It looks like an F-35, an F-22. I mean, it looks just like our stuff. So they were stealing. What I think we maybe are not aware of or weren't as conscious of is they weren't just stealing our blueprints for our things. They were stealing our processes, how we do things, how we do research, acquisition system is not perfect, but it does produce some of the most exquisite technology in the world. They were copying that, and they've learned how to actually do it faster than us. That's what's alarming to me. I do think the silver lining, though, and maybe it's just I'm an optimist, but I am an optimist. I truly believe that if we, as free nations around the world, right, and I know right now is an interesting, tenuous time between our nations, but I do believe that if we can align the free nations around the world that think like democratically aligned folks, I believe there's a way to really unlock an innovation engine and the innovation machine that can outpace even China. I truly believe that. But it's going to take it's going to take some very strong leadership with strong vision, a good aligned vision for the future. I believe we can do that because I think what China, again, they've learned to do, they can innovate now. I mean, they always could, but they're doing okay now. But I still think we can go faster because again, we as free nations, we share ideas, we share feelings. We're not as afraid to fail because we, at least most, I won't say most, I do anyway. I believe the best way you learn is when you fail. That's how you learn, okay? And you can do that without being penalized. You do that in Russia or China, it's not necessarily a good day for you, right? And you don't share because you're afraid to share. That is our secret superpower, as it were. We've got to figure out how to really optimize that and align ourselves together to go do this. Because if we can do that, I think we can take on China. And again, the goal is not to have a war with China. It's to deter China. It's to convince China to follow the norms and rules and regulations of the world and not try to do their own thing. That should be our goal. And that takes strong leadership. So, yeah. All right.
Oh, yeah. I have a live question. Yeah,
sure.
Talking about exactly what you were saying, Kevin Rudd, that used to be the Prime Minister of Australia's prominence and knowledge, he always says that the way to face China is through three principles. Never question our principles, never question our relation with the United States.
Yep.
Third, back attack like the wars. What I mean is that alliances, as you were pointing out, are absolutely essential.
Yeah.
So my question is, arms, weapons in relation with the allies.
Yeah.
I happened to be ambassador to Ukraine when the whole Maidan
Oh,
started.
wow. Sure.
So I realized that, for instance, a Tomahawk missile given to Ukraine in 2014, for 2014, would have been a fantastic deterrence.
Yeah.
Whereas today, it is terribly expensive and much more dangerous.
Yeah.
So the idea is how much you introduce in your strategic analysis how to use the weapons through the allies.
Yeah.
Because deterrence, if you talk about a war with capital letters, the answer is just deterrence.
That's right.
What envisages
That's
really
right.
a confrontation head on. But a confrontation by proxy or through ally is every day.
Yeah.
And Ukraine is the best example.
Right.
So that's my question. In the strategic analysis, how you introduce the fact that these weapons should be used through proxy wars, if you want to call it that way, or much more precisely, allies using those words.
Yeah, I mean, I think, to your point, if we'd given those weapons to Ukraine in 2014, it might have totally changed Putin's calculus. Right? He may have said, this is too risky. Not going to do this, right? And that would be the hope. So, and again, I'm not a politician. I'm not going to try to be today. Maybe in the future, but not now. Right? Yeah, right. But I do think it takes strong political leadership and political will. It also takes strong advice from the military to advise political leadership what the arsenals can do in a deterrent manner, as well as obviously an offensive manner if you ever get to that point. I think, Ukraine is obviously we were warned once, right, when Crimea was taken, and then obviously it happened again. So that's a really troubling one. I think it's a wake-up call, and I think we're at the right now we're seeing Putin push all of the levers. These incursions with drones and this thing that happened in Poland with this train, and you're seeing a lot of things being pulsed here. So I think the nations of the world really need to come together and start having very serious strategic conversations about, where are the flashpoints, what are things we could possibly do ahead of time to get after that. I have doubts that right now is the time where that will happen. I'm hopeful things will get to a point where we can have those conversations because I think they're critically important. Because again, the threats are real. And again, you folks here in Europe, it's closer to you than it is even to me. For me, China is thousands of yards away, and Russia is it's miles away. So while we certainly think about it, and I'm very strategically focused, so I think about it probably more than the average American. Average American's not thinking about it. I can tell you that, and that's okay. That's not on them to worry about every single world problem. But world leaders need to be thinking about this kind of stuff, and there needs to be some serious conversations about what can be done to try to prevent these kind of things from happening in the future. So
if I can build on that answer, there's two questions here on the chat
Yeah.
that are related to that. Sort of like, I guess one way to look at this is in order to kind of have a valid conversation, everybody has to bring something to the table. And there is concern in some of the questions in the chat that Europe may not have the strategic independence necessary to bring something to that table, to that conversation. And so the questions mostly relate about, is Europe regulation making Europe too slow? Do you have recommendations for how to change the policy? Of course, you don't know about that. What's your thoughts about how Europe can gain some level of strategic independence so that conversation can actually happen in real
Well, I mean, so to get away from the conflict side of it, I think in general, I think you've got to start with your youth, your students, right? And I think it's everything from, how do you inspire them to want to be leaders? And I'm not suggesting that every kid should be a scientist or an engineer, but there's many who should be who don't, right? And I think that is a problem. The free nations of the world are not producing enough scientists and engineers right now. That's a problem. I believe that's a problem. In the U.S., again, when I was the chief of naval research, I was responsible for STEM education for the Navy and Marine Corps, and so we did, robotics competitions. We had mentors that went to schools, and I used to jokingly say it's K, which is kindergarten, like really young, through PhD, because it's never too late to try to engage somebody and try to convince them that A, doing something patriotic is a worthy cause for their lives, or B, becoming a scientist or engineer when they're younger, giving them the time to think about it and then go to the right schools to get those degrees. And again, I'm not trying to convince somebody who wants to be an art major or a lawyer or a doctor to be an engineer, but again, there's many people who, because they're not exposed to somebody that inspires them or gives them a good example, as a result of that, they never even think about it. And by the time they're in college, or when maybe they don't even go to college, it's kind of too late. And I think that's a shame, particularly for women. There's a lot of women that I think would be phenomenal engineers who just don't ever see this. And I think that's where I tell my workforce all the time, when I was the chief engineer and chief of naval research, that you have to be leaders. You have to be a leader as a scientist, as an engineer. It's not just about being in the laboratory with your head down in the details. You've got to occasionally stand up and go talk to people about why you do what you do. Try to find a way to inspire them to do the things. I mean, like me, it was Neil Armstrong, right? Stepping on the moon. That was what got me. There's a lot of stuff going on today with amazing technology that should get people excited. And it's up to some of us that are a little more seasoned to mentor those young kids and say, you should take a look at these kind of different fields. Because I think until we get the young generations, of the world kind of engaged in the problems and trying to find ways to solve them, I'm 60, I'll be 62 in 2 weeks. I mean, I want to go till I'm in my 90s. So I got a lot of time. But I need young people to be the machine that makes this happen, because, again, my blinders have come in, theirs is not, and we need those new, fresh ideas and that energy to drive that. And that's where leadership comes in, to inspire them. Sir? Yeah.
There is also, I think, a question of social recognition
Yeah.
and cost benefit
Yeah.
for the engineering career. Right?
Yeah.
I'm an engineer also. So
Yeah, right.
I have
Yeah.
children who are engineers too. But,
Yeah, yeah.
One could be an excellent engineer and she's not doing it.
Yeah, right.
Okay, so,
Yeah.
but I think there's also, so the money, there's easier money.
Yeah, yeah.
Becoming a lawyer or a financier.
Yeah, right.
Than for engineers, so I think we have an issue.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that, again, that comes down to the folks who are in the field, that are passionate about it, that love doing it, that need to talk more about it. And a lot of my engineer friends are very, very shy, or they're not very outward. They don't like to speak publicly. But those who can should, and those who don't should find other ways to talk to younger generations and mentor them. And you don't have to be on stage to do it. You can do that in a very personal way, which is good. But we need to do more of that, really do. So
I can actually give you a data point for that precise point.
Yeah.
At the time Apple was founded, 1976, if you look at the actuary tables and salary tables of the year, the highest paid job was engineer.
Yeah.
Right, by far,
Yeah.
of various flavors. Right, so various engineers. If you look at the tables today, engineering is like middle of the table to the bottom, which means that we pride as a society on other things.
Yeah.
But kind of like on the building also on what you've said throughout the night tonight. I mean, to me, what's really interesting, every time you and I have spoken, also what we want to share here is that there's always the comment that we start with defense. It's an imperative, defense, not war, right?
Yeah.
And we end up with science, with technology, with literacy in science and technology. with improving our society, more robust industry, and so on. So in a way, everything ends up pointing to us, even though we start with defense.
Yeah.
And I think this is a really important lesson for us nowadays in the context in which we live today.
Yeah.
Right. But I also would like to do a shout out to the foundation, because ever since I left to the United States 3 years ago, and we've been talking years and years on, the comment we've done and what we started to do here in this foundation just literally this week is essentially all about making it, let me just say it like my son would say it, cool, or today, to look at technology projects and you know what, think you can actually do this. And so that's one of the things we've done from this foundation with the support of the Rafael del Pino family, is promote an idea of innovation and with technology as something that you can actually invent the future, which is a lot what we've said here, and also promoting from the very start. I know that programs I'm not even involved in that target precisely the K through 12 things. So I would say in some ways, the advice you've given today for a better Europe is something that this house has already been actively been promoting for a lot of years.
Yeah,
right?
That's fantastic.
So do we have time for one more question? So this is the difficult question, because we cannot let you go without like...
I thought they were getting the exam.
Yeah, no, well, you'll get the exam too, then we'll pass the paper, right? So a lot of concern, you've talked like about promoting dialogue, promoting the university systems, and we all see the news. We see the reduction in budgets in United States universities. We see, this is one of the questions here, is like, less of a long-term vision, more of a short-term vision.
Right.
And we're not asking you to criticize anyone or even comment on anybody's politics. That's not what this house does. But what is are you concerned? Are you not concerned? What do you think needs to be changed in the future? How do you envision us getting back into the better path, or even if that thing, or if you haven't?
Yeah, I mean, I do have concerns when people talk about wanting to cut science, particularly science and technology budgets. R&D budgets, yes, but science and technology in particular is the foundation of kind of the future tech that we will all enjoy in 20, 30, or 40 years, right? That is the critical. That's that long vision, long view thing I talked about from the get-go. And so when you talk about trying to cut that, or some people even suggested that venture capitalists can fill that void, and as we've already discussed here today, they're not going to do that. They're looking at that 3 to 5, maybe 8 years at the most kind of vision. That's as far as they're going to look. And so if it's beyond that, they're just not going to. They're not going to invest in it. They're just not. And so there has been there were some cuts that were made early on. Many of those have been restored because a lot of people have gone back and said, look, this is really important. So that does give me hope that people are starting to realize that this is actually important. When I was the chief of naval research, again, I did that for 3 years, it was almost a monthly phone call that I make to some senior leader somewhere to explain why science and technology was so important. There was constant pressure to cut my budget to go solve some today problem that the Navy or Marine Corps had, right? And I had to constantly fight that and say, look, this money, you don't know it today, but I'm telling you, it's like the day you decide you need a shade tree, you can't plant the seed that day and get it. It's not like you can go to the store and buy that, right? It takes decades to grow that tree. Same thing with these science technology things. So I was constantly having to kind of educate senior leaders on how important that is. I think that's going on now, and people are starting to realize that this is actually really important. So yeah, I'm still concerned because I mean there's things that have been happening, but I have also seen that there's been some of that put back, which is important. If you like cut S&T, science technology today, 20, 30 years, venture capitalists would have nothing to invest in, right? And that's not a good place to be. China would be way ahead of us at that point. That'd be terrible. We cannot let that happen. So, yeah.
Excellent. On that note of staying ahead and helping us all get ahead, I want to thank you in the name of everybody. Vicente, do you want to do a closing? Any closing?
Yes, I said, don't go wrong.
Well, just press again the gratitude of the foundation for this opportunity to develop this event around these strategic aspects, no? And it was a really inspiring discussion, and so thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
And we hope you you to enjoy the rest of your stay in Spain, and we hope to see you soon.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Back to the foundation. And now, last but not least, and I will turn now to Spanish, because you know that one of the aims of the foundation is to defend Spanish as a vehicle of communication in the world. So we always develop the introductions and the conclusions in Spanish. Solo para decirles que.
And this is just to say thank you so very much, not only to our friends, thank you very much to Lorin Selvy and Luis Perez-Breva. Thank you for having joined us today. This is a really important issue. Thank you all very, very much, and good evening.